Picture this. You meet someone you like, the conversation is easy, you feel excited, then they don't text back, and suddenly your mind starts spiraling. Has this ever happened to you? It happened to one of our listeners who asked why a delayed text can trigger anxiety and fear of losing someone. It's something so many of us quietly struggle with. And today, licensed marriage and family therapist and secure love author Julie Menanno breaks down what's really happening in those moments and why anxious attachment can turn a delayed text into fear of abandonment. So if you've ever overthought a message, checked your phone on repeat, or felt your chest tighten waiting for a reply, this conversation is going to change the way you understand dating, relationships, and emotional triggers. So let's get started. Hey everyone, and welcome back to 52, the podcast where we help you date with clarity, courage, and intention so you can build relationships that actually last. I'm Kelly, a former tech attorney turned intentional dating and relationship advocate. And if you've ever thought, why does dating feel so much harder than it should? Or why do I keep ending up in the same emotional patterns? Today's episode is for you. And we're so excited to welcome Julie Menanno to the show today. Julie is a licensed marriage and family therapist, relationship educator, and the creator of the Secure Relationship. She's also the author of the powerful book, Secure Love, which helps people identify destructive attachment cycles and replace them with secure, emotionally connected patterns, whether they're single, dating, or in a long-term relationship, even married. Now, Julie has a rare ability to take attachment theory and translate it into real life moments. The silences, the spirals, the shutdowns, and show people how to respond differently in the moment. And on that note, please join me in welcoming Julie. Julie, we're so honored to have you here with us today. How are you? Where are you joining us from?
I'm great, and I'm coming from Montana.
Oh,
Yeah.
amazing. Thank you for joining us today. So, Julie, before we dive into our question of the day, let's start with the foundational question for our listeners. What is the attachment behavioral system and what are attachment styles?
Mhm.
How do attachment styles show up in relationships?
Okay, so I like to compare the attachment behavioral system in the body to the appetite system. So we are driven to eat, right? And the way that our bodies say eat is it gives us an uncomfortable sensation. And that causes us to seek food because that is part of the way we survive, right? And so the attachment behavioral system is the same, except for it drives us to seek connection because humans need connection. They need a sense of belonging to feel safe in the world because we simply can't survive as isolated. It's kind of a cold word, but animals, species.
Yeah.
So we are driven to connect and driven to love. And whenever that connection is disrupted and we don't feel emotionally safe, we are supposed to have an uncomfortable feeling in our body. That uncomfortable feeling says, get this connection back. Something isn't right. And some people experience it in their chest and their head and all different parts of their body. And so we can categorize people based on how they try to regain connection. And so those with anxious attachment, they try really desperate measures to fill the distance. And those with avoidant attachment, they just kind of try to disconnect from the need altogether. And they try to feel a sense of connection through other ways that we'll talk about later. And then those with disorganized attachment do kind of some of all of it. There's usually some trauma related. The trauma causes them to have higher levels of fear. And so the fear kind of is more likely to get their nervous system in a more intense state of unsafety. So they're going to even be more desperate to either connect or just try to completely numb out. And then people with secure attachment, they are equipped, they have the emotional tools to help themselves emotionally and seek emotional co-regulation from the other person. And they know how to get in touch with what they're really needing. And they know how to communicate about those needs in ways that are vulnerable, but, not blaming. They know how to reach with health and increase the odds that the person on the other side is going to be able to be responsive to that. And of course, it does require that that other person has the skills to be responsive.
Yeah. Wow. That's such an important place to start. So thank you for sharing that. To our listeners, before we get started, just know we're going to walk through a listener submitted situation and unpack what's really happening beneath the surface. So grab your coffee or matcha, or depending on the time it is by you, your wine, and take a deep breath and let's dive in. Julie, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. So we have a submitted question from a man in his late 20s in New York. He's dating someone he really likes, but he shares that when she doesn't respond to his text right away, his mind spirals. He starts overanalyzing tone, checking her social media, and assuming the worst, that something is wrong between him and her, even though she might just be at Pilates or out hiking for
Hmm.
the afternoon. So, Julie, our first question on this topic, and you actually bring this up in chapter 2 of your book on attachment needs and emotional safety. In that chapter, you explain that anxious attachment isn't about being needy, it's about fear. So, what is someone with anxious attachment actually afraid of when they spiral over, let's say, an unanswered text?
Okay, so we're all fundamentally afraid of abandonment by someone that we love, just like we're afraid of losing someone that we love. That is not an irrational thing to fear. Part of, love is fear of loss. And so what happens with anxious attachment is they have experienced so much in their life, especially during childhood when we really, really need even more safety around abandonment. And it's not just physical, it's emotional because emotional abandonment leads to physical abandonment. Well, it doesn't always lead to physical abandonment, but it
Hmm.
leads to very painful feelings of being alone. And it does send the message that if I'm not really going to show up for your emotions, I must not value you. You must not be lovable. And that does create a fear of physical abandonment. But just to kind of clarify, emotional abandonment is as also extraordinarily painful. So if a child or even adult has experienced this fear over and over and over again, and has actually had the consequences of that fear actualized, their body is going to do everything in their power to not have to go back there. And
Um,
they know it palpably. And so this man and all the other anxious partners out there, they start being super hyper vigilant to anything that signals you're going to go away. You're going to go away. And their bodies do that because that pain motivates them to try to keep the person close. And so someone with a secure attachment, that fear is going to be less likely to be triggered because they won't have had all these bad experiences in their life. Someone with anxious attachment, the smallest thing can come along and trigger that fear. And so with this man, what it is in his body, when he doesn't get that text back, it is very real that he's going to be abandoned or the likelihood is high. So they're always walking around, and then the part of the problem is they don't know how to heal the fear on their own. And so the fear gets stuck in their body. So they get stuck in these cycles of, well, I don't know how to heal the fear. Of course, this is all subconscious. So what I have to do is create an environment where nothing bad will happen. And that's not a possible environment to create.
yeah.
So, but they keep spinning their wheels trying, and that's the gasoline. The gasoline is make my environment, make the people around me 1,000% safe, need constant reassurance that only lasts for 5 minutes. And
This is from
then
your quote, watering the plant with gasoline.
yes, yeah,
I
that's
just
the
love that.
gasoline, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting to try to constantly, and sometimes it could be not just relationship oriented, but cleaning your house oriented. I don't want to feel overwhelmed. I don't know how to deal with overwhelm.
Mhm.
And overwhelm might be knocking on my door in any given moment. So I have to be really obsessive around keeping my environment perfectly clean so things don't spiral into chaos and disaster. So it can show up in other parts of life. But of course, attachment theory is specific to relationships.
Thank you for sharing that. And when it comes down to it, why does uncertainty, especially around communication, like for example, an unanswered text, feel
Mhm.
so threatening to someone with anxious attachment?
Because they do associate for their body, this is abandonment. It's not this might be abandonment. Even though their head might come in and say, "Okay, this isn't rational," right? But because their body is screaming, abandonment is right around the corner. If they're not texting back, that means they don't care. That means they're not thinking about me. That means they're checking out. And after this is all over and the partner comes back around and says, "No, I was just at Pilates," then all of a sudden, in a snap of a finger, their nervous system can go, "Oh, I'm
Fine.
safe." Yeah. But, again, I just want to just reiterate that this is nervous system work. So the healing is in getting this person to be able to help their own feelings of fear in addition to getting reassurance. If they're only relying on emotional regulation from their partner, giving them reassurance, it's like an empty bucket. It's never going to be enough.
It's so true. And how does the anxious partner's need for reassurance sometimes push their partner away, even though connection is what they're seeking?
Well, because they get a lot of times, you know, the anxiety is pulling for too much. The anxiety is saying, "I don't know how to care for my own emotions. I don't know how to help my own emotions. So I need you to do all the work." And that's not possible for anyone. And again, that's where we cross the line from I need support from you, I need help with my emotions, and I need you to behave and say the right things at all times so I don't get triggered. They don't know how to
Mm,
deal with the trigger, so they do pull for too much, and that's one reason. And then they pull for more than is what humanly is possible. And of course, now that's gonna tap into the avoidant fears of failure. They're wanting
right,
more from me than I can give, and so I'm gonna let them down and fail myself and all these terrible things. And
right.
so, then another reason that they push away is because then they get stuck in anger. So they either get
Ooh.
stuck in anger or anxiety, and the anger is unexpressed anger from years and years of being abandoned. And why are you doing this? I've got to bring attention to the problem. So my body is pushing me to tell you what you're doing wrong and tell you how bad you are. And maybe if you can take that in, you'll want to change and you'll go, "Oh, you're right. I am bad. I do need to kind of change myself here." And, that probably isn't the best strategy because usually when we're only communicating from anger, anger pushes people away. At the
Right.
same time, the anger does need to be validated and heard and understood. We need to be able to get to other parts of that anger and communicate from that place. Because if we're just going around communicating from reactive anger as opposed to healthy assertion, we are going to push people away. I mean, that's the reality. That's not, it's not a way to pull someone in.
No, 100%. And speaking of which, you discuss the importance of regulating emotional responses in your book, Secure Love.
Hmm.
So, just on that, you speak about the importance of self regulation when building a healthy long term relationship. What are some practical ways someone with anxious attachment can regulate themselves before reacting or reaching out impulsively? Like in this case, with this
Hmm.
guy not getting a text back from the girl.
There's lots of different ways to regulate. I mean, some people will say breathing techniques and just moving your body, and I address this in the book. Um, but the best way to self-regulate is to process your feelings. It's getting really clear about what this fear is and being able to process that, and that's what I help people do in my work. Process that down into the grief, the unexpressed grief, the sadness, where the tears are, and that it's pain, but it's also regulated pain. And it's very different from staying in if you don't do that, you're going to stay in anxiety and anger. There's
Yeah.
only two things to do. You can either just get in there and there's value and enormous value. You can't do your feelings as a person, as a human individual without doing that work, right? but you also can't connect with others without doing that work. So if you're not able to do that work, you're just going to show up to your partner reactively instead of vulnerably. And of course, they need to have, the emotional health on their end to be able to respond to that with health. But you can't, the first step is being able to communicate yourself with health. And if there's a block on their end, okay, now we have a different problem that we need to talk about. But we can't say, okay, I'm only going to do this vulnerably if I know for sure they're going to be over there to be able to, do exactly what I want them to do.
Right. No, absolutely. And, just flipping the script here from the girl's side, that, the guy is dating this girl, she's at Pilates, not answering his texts or wherever she is, hiking,
Mhm.
whatever she's doing, maybe not by her phone. When it comes down to it, how can a partner respond to anxious attachment with empathy without feeling like they have to constantly manage someone else's emotions? So, like from her side, how should she manage his anxious attachment?
I say really leaning in and, the need that this person has at the end of the day is attachment needs. They need to be understood, they need to be validated, and they need to be seen.
Hmm.
And if that person can learn to respond in that way, the anxious partner over time will stop crying for help because that is the opposite of emotional abandonment. And so one way to do that is to lean in and say, okay, hold on. I know you're scared right now. What are you afraid of? And that person, hopefully, the anxious partner will know how to get into that vulnerability and say, you know what? I'm afraid that this means you're going to go away. I'm afraid it means you don't care about me. And I've had that experience so many times in life that my body is sensitive to that. They have to learn to say this, right?
Communicate.
And
Yeah.
yeah. And so then the partner is able to lean instead of getting defensive, instead of saying, that's not true. And I'm not going to leave you, or getting frustrated, or just trying to appease them. Next time I'll text back. They
Mm.
lean into the emotion and they validate. Of course, you're scared. That makes so much sense to me. Seen, because you have experienced this in your life over and over. And it makes sense. If you love me, you're going to be afraid of that because love has always led to abandonment for you, or enough of the time for your nervous system to be scared. And so in that is the seeing, the understanding the fear, and then just the validation of that. And that's kind of an oversimplified way sometimes of saying that, because there can be different blocks to getting there. But generally speaking, that's it. It's just leaning in, and that's the opposite of emotional abandonment, which is actually filling the need instead of just words of reassurance that really won't. It's like the difference between, a balanced meal, protein, fat, fiber, carb, and junk food that might feel okay in the moment, but it's not sustainable. You're going to be hungry an hour later.
Yep. No,
So,
absolutely. And I just want to repeat again how important healthy communication is. And how when you're working with someone, whether it be a therapist, coach, they really help with those skills.
yes,
So
absolutely.
that's extremely important. And, what does secure reassurance look like and how is it different from constant validation?
Well, it's secure reassurance is emotional support, right?
Mhm.
We need validation for the relationship to be healthy. That is emotional support. Like I said, understanding, validation, being seen, letting your partner know you're caring for them. It becomes constant when the triggers are overwhelming the system, to where the relationship is choked out by this constant need for emotional support. So,
Mhm.
my question as a therapist is going to be, what is getting in the way here that this person is needing so much emotional support? That's all we're doing in the relationship, or that's what we're doing most of the time. And that's exhausting, right? And it means something's not working. And so I have to go in there and figure out what's not working that this is getting across. And it's probably going to be one of two things. It's probably going to be that again, that person doesn't really know how to deal with their own emotions. So they're just constantly seeking, right? And every time they get triggered, and they're going to get triggered more if they don't know how to deal with their emotions. And so it is going to be pulling for too much. And
Right.
then the second reason that might be happening is the person really isn't validating. And the receiving partner's body knows that. This isn't validation. This is just them trying to get the words right, but their heart isn't really in it. We talk a lot about communication, but communication is really just the delivery system for emotional safety. So
I love that.
if there's not real emotional support in there, it's just appeasing, or it's just about that person trying to get it right, which is anxiety driven, which blocks connection. So again, it's either going to be, if that constant need is there and it's taking up too much space, then it's either because that person isn't able to take it in for whatever reason, again, including that it's just not enough and their anxiety around it not being enough is blocking that, or the other person just isn't really doing it to begin with. And sometimes
Yeah.
it's a mixture of both.
Oh, really. I loved hearing that. And, to wrap up this question, our listener here happens to be a guy with anxious attachment. But in your book, Secure Love, you share that those with anxious attachment tend to be women,
Mhm.
while those with avoidant attachment tend to be men.
Mhm.
Why is that?
Well, I think a couple of reasons. I think one is the socialization piece, which is men and boys aren't socialized to be in touch with their emotions, because, well, for a few different reasons. They're generally valued for being strong, and vulnerability is associated with weakness when really what it is, vulnerability is actually strength. It's just a different kind of
Right.
strength. It's just a different kind of success. And then women it's more appropriate for women to be emotional. I think that's shifting now. And I think it's interesting when you talk about, you know, overachieving women have taken on that fear of weakness more than women in the past, who were more valued for what they can emotionally give,
Right.
to the world or to children or to husbands. And then I think there's a biological piece there too, which is physically women are more vulnerable. When you think of just primitive humans out in the, nature, we're the ones that have to carry the babies. We're the ones that have to
Yeah.
breastfeed. And so that puts us in a very vulnerable position. And so we need messages from partners that we're emotionally safe, because that says, you're not going to leave me. You love me. You care about me. I can sit in this cave taking care of this baby that I have to feel emotionally available to even want to take care of, because that's love. And then the men biologically have more of an advantage for shutting their emotions down when they're out in the world hunting and gathering, and they're facing very scary elements, scary situations. And so if they're just overcome with their fear, they're not going to be as successful at getting the food to take home to their woman and babies. And of course, we've evolved beyond that to some degree, but not that far beyond that. So I think it's a mixture of the biology with the nurture. And that's, of course, when something's going wrong, because men are more likely when something isn't emotionally healthy in the home. Men are going
Mm.
to default to avoidant more often, but they're not born that way. Women are going to default to anxious more often, but they're not born that way. This is 100% relationally created. Attachment, insecurity, and security is created by how you learn to do emotions and how you're comforted for emotions by your caregivers. In fact, we're born to have secure attachment. It just gets warped. And I just want to say this, this by no means that someone with a male with an anxious attachment is abnormal, or a female with an avoidant attachment is abnormal. It's not true at all. 25% is big numbers. There's a lot of people in those categories. There's so many layers to it. So I just don't want to leave anyone feeling like,
No,
shamed.
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, there's no judgment here at all, and there's no shame at all on anyone. But it's interesting because our listener here happens to be a guy, so
Sure.
it definitely is common that guys have anxious attachment as well.
Absolutely.
So
Yep.
you absolutely you're correct. You're totally on point with that. And on that note, to our listener who submitted this question, best of luck. You know, really communicate like Julie suggests to the girl that you're dating. And if you have any questions, Julie and her team are here to help you out. So definitely feel free to reach out to her. Julie, thank you so much for joining us today and for the work you do. Your book, Secure Love, gives people language for what they're experiencing and the tools to change it. I mean, I read this in one day, fabulous book,
Wow.
and the things I learned from it were just extremely helpful. Amazing. So thank you for that. Before we wrap up, Julie, where can our listeners find you and connect with you and your work?
Yes. So my book is available anywhere books are sold. Secure Love by Julie Menanno. I have my podcast, the Secure Love Podcast, which walks real couples through the process of the book.
So cool.
Yeah, I have my website, thesecurerelationship.com. I have tons of workshops. I have courses on there, courses for anxious attachment, courses for negative cycles and how to stabilize them. And then I have my Instagram account, which is at the Secure Relationship. There's also a Facebook version of that, and that just provides all kinds of tips
And where's your book available?
everywhere books are sold, bookstores and Amazon. And there's an audiobook.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing all of that. So, everyone, to our listeners, you know where to find her book. Amazon was very easy for me. Definitely feel free to get her book on there. And then her Instagram, I literally vouch for it. The tips are amazing. And there are a lot
Thank
of
you.
birds also. If you like birds, the birds
Yes.
on her
Bird
post too.
cartoons. Yes.
Bird cartoons, which we love. And on that note, here's what we want to leave with you today. Secure love isn't about finding someone who never triggers you. It's about learning how to recognize the cycle and choosing connection instead of protection. So if you're anxious, avoidant, disorganized, or somewhere in between, you're not broken. You're learning how to love more securely and honestly in a much more healthy way. So if this episode resonated, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs it. And as always, date with intention, trust your journey, build long lasting relationships, and stay true to yourself. Until next time, happy dating. The content in this podcast is for entertainment and is not mental health, medical, or personal relationship counseling. It is not a substitute for professional expertise and judgment from a licensed healthcare or mental health professional. You should seek the advice of a qualified professional when seeking mental health or medical advice to obtain a diagnosis or any treatment regarding your mental health or well-being. The content in this podcast may not be applicable to you and your specific situation. Topics discussed in this podcast may include information that may be considered sensitive or emotionally charged to some people, and therefore listener discretion is advised. References to third-party resources are for informational purposes only, and 52 Inc. takes no responsibility for the content of those resources. This podcast is copyrighted 2025 by 52 Inc., all rights reserved.